Hello everyone, this is Devin Musgrave, your host for today. Welcome to the webinar IC to VP, 4 Transitions, Many Challenges, presented by Construx CEO Steve McConnell. Many of you are probably familiar with Steve thanks to Code Complete, More Effective Agile, and other books. Some of you might not be familiar with Steve's long-standing focus on software career pathing and leadership. For many years, Steve has curated Construx's Software Leadership Summit, and he also created the Construx Professional Development Ladder, the most in-depth career progression framework available for software professionals. You can download a PDF overview of the Professional Development Ladder on the Construx site. We will have a Q&A session at the end using the Q&A app inside Teams. Look for the icon with the question mark inside the word balloon, and feel free to type your questions whenever you like. By the way, you can also choose the Turn on Live Captions option here in Teams if you find that helpful. And finally, down next to Steve's name in the presentation frame, there are 3 dots. We find it helpful if you choose Fit to Frame there. It helps the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll share a link to the recording in the future. Thanks for joining us. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, as Devin said, this has been an area of interest of mine for a really long time, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk with you all about this today. I thought I would start just by giving a little bit of context, which is that a lot of this content is related to a learning program that I'm leading from time to time called Transitioning to Software Leadership. And so if you like this content, I'll give you some more information about this learning program at the end of the presentation. So I think we should just dive right in. And the first question here is, why would anybody even be interested in moving into management? Why would anybody want to make the transition from individual contributor to VP? And I think there are a lot of different possibilities. One of the most interesting stories I ever heard was 2 guys founded a company. Neither of them wanted to go into the people management side of the business, so they flipped a coin. One of the guys lost, and so that guy got to go into the people management side of things. The other guy got to stay technical. Another common reason that people go into more of a people management track in software is the realization that the biggest problems tend to be with people. And technical challenges are certainly always there, but the people challenges can be the thing that really block progress on the technical side. Another possibility that I think comes really from good self-awareness and strength is when someone realizes that their greatest personal strength is actually in the people management side. And I think it takes a fair amount of humility for somebody to say, yeah, I'm pretty good technically, but I think I have a greater ability to contribute if I get to contribute more with the people focus, being technically competent, but maybe excellent on the people side. Another common pattern, I think, is that people will say, things kept coming up where we needed to actually do something with the people, and I kept gravitating toward the role. I kept getting pulled into the role, and so finally I just kind of admitted what had been obvious to me for a while, which was I was just gravitational forces were pulling me toward the people side of the role. And then I think another pattern is people just wanting to have more influence. And they say, there's only so much influence I can have as a technical person, particularly on the non-technical parts of the organization. And so I can have more influence if I'm able to move into the people side, and that allows me to influence the technical people as well as non-technical people. So those are some reasons that people move into management. I think to set some context for the overall career transition, I'll just map out how I kind of a way that I view organizations, and then that sets up how to think about the transition. I start just by saying, if I'm an individual contributor, then I've got a fairly small focus, narrow focus, just on the parts that I work with. So, and the parts that I work with tend to be the tech parts, because we're talking about technical talk where somebody's a technical individual contributor. I should be clear about that. I'm not talking about a sales individual contributor. And so I'm focused technically, and I'm also pretty focused on tasks. I'm focused in particular on my tasks. So that's one level of the organization. And I think as I broaden my view of the organization, Then a slightly broader part is a team. If I'm an individual, I'm participating as part of a team. My team exists inside an organization, uh, and that organization, depending on the size of the company, that might actually be the same as the company if it's a small company, or it might be a business unit or something like that. And then there's a larger context, which in some sense is like the whole context, which is the company. And then actually that's not the whole context though, because companies exist in an overall ecosystem. And that overall ecosystem I'm going to talk about today as the market. And so if I'm an individual contributor and I'm thinking about making this transition from individual contributor to VP, what really happens here is, in a nutshell, is that I start out kind of focused on my individual work. I focus on my team. And so I'm kind of looking in these two ways. As time goes by, my focus expands out to the organization. Later, it expands out to the company. Eventually, it expands out to the whole market. So in a nutshell, this is what happens, and I'm going to spend the rest of the talk detailing what happens at each step in that transition. So where it starts is very much at the individual contributor level. And as I said, the individual contributor focus on the technology and focus on tasks. Really, as an individual contributor, yeah, I spend some time coordinating with other people. I spend some time maybe coordinating mostly with people inside my team, maybe some amount of time coordinating with people outside my team. At the end of the day, though, my mission really is complete my tasks, complete them in a collaborative and cooperative way, but I'm kind of focused on my own work. Clearly, though, I am also part of a team, and so I am going to actually say that as an individual contributor, part of my focus also goes into the team that I'm on, and I need to be able to coordinate tasks with other people on my team. I need to be able to answer questions, ask questions. I might get a little bit outside my team. Really, at every level in the organization, there's going to be some amount of interdisciplinary work where I'm talking to product manager, I'm talking to product owner, I'm talking to other SMEs outside the team. But really, most of my focus is just right here inside the team. So if I'm an individual contributor, for the most part, this is kind of my world. I'm living in the team. And yeah, I go out and talk to customers sometimes if I'm in an organization that lets me talk to customers. I think that's a super healthy practice. But in most organizations that we've worked with, that's not going to be part of the day-to-day work. That's going to be something that happens on a more infrequent basis. So that's kind of where it starts. Clearly, the individual contributor is inside the larger organization. They're inside the larger company. These all affect the individual contributor, but the focus is very much on individual work. So the first transition then is that transition from individual contributor to lead. And whereas the individual contributor is really kind of staying inside the area designated by the red line, the lead is expanding a little bit, maybe not a lot, outside of the red line here. They need to have some awareness of what's going on in the rest of the organization. They need to have some awareness of how their team coordinates with other teams, especially if they're working on a project of any size and there are multiple teams involved, and that inter-team coordination uh, is important. But I think in a lot of ways, the lead role, which I'm thinking of here as a technical lead role, more than as a people management lead role, which I think is most common in the organizations that we've seen anyway, they're still kind of staying in this space, mostly focused on the team. And so in a lot of ways, I view the transition from individual contributor to lead as essentially a warm-up for the challenges that will be faced at the next step from lead to manager. But there are a few things that come up here that are worth noting. The biggest one, I think, is what I call the lead fallacy. And the lead fallacy is based on the idea that uh, in most technical organizations, the lead role is considered to be kind of a minor promotion from the individual contributor role, and it's typically essentially a recognition that the lead is contributing at a somewhat higher level than their peers. It's a recognition of technical excellence and technical contribution. And so the fallacy part of this is that when someone moves into the lead role and then they start taking on responsibility for making decisions about work that other people are doing, that they start actually kind of assuming that other people's ability to contribute is the same as theirs. And this is the fallacy. The fallacy is that there's a reason that you got put into the lead role in the first place, which is that you're above average. And when you then start saying, well, then everybody else should be contributing the same as me, you're not giving yourself credit for the fact that you were above average in the first place. So that's the fallacy. And that can become fairly damaging at that point where I think you can get a lot of perceived arrogance in that role because of the person now trying to impose their performance standards on others. And they might truly be better, often they are, but sometimes they just have more experience, so they're imposing more senior performance standards on a more junior person or that kind of thing. Um, in general, I think we can just have kind of a realistic sense of own contribution, but an unrealistic sense of others' contributions, and so that's the fallacy. Uh, the question here I'm really setting up as a preview of what happens as we get into manager and hire. Can you still be the most knowledgeable person in the room? In a typical lead role, the answer really is expected, I think, to be yes. I mean, really, the lead in some sense is first among equals, and so not really a huge amount of challenge there. We get to keep doing the stuff that we like to do, which is the really deep technical stuff. And overall, I would say most challenges here really are minor. We're still kind of focused on the same kind of work. We're working with the same kind of people. Our scope of interest in the organization is about the same. So really, I think I don't see this presenting a lot of challenges overall compared to what we get to at the next step. So that next step is the lead to manager challenge. And here, whereas the lead is focused at the team level, the manager's scope of influence ends up being bigger. The manager is, again, depending on the size of the organization, manager is actually now concerned with more than one team, typically, and at least a piece of the organization. And a bigger organization, a bigger company, it's not going to be the whole organization typically, but at least part of the organization. So the manager conceptually is kind of out here somewhere. They're outside the team. They're probably pretty significantly aware of what's going on inside the team, or usually teams that they're overseeing. Uh, and they're also starting to have some greater awareness of what's going on in the organization and some greater awareness of what's going on even in the company. So, this is going to vary somewhat depending on the size of the organization and industry the organization's in. These terms of individual contributor, I think, is pretty universal. Lead starts to be less universal. Manager starts to be a lot less universal. By the time we start talking about director and VP, I'm going to put a bunch of asterisks on what those words mean when we get there. But right now, when I say manager, I mean someone that is over at least one team and has people management responsibility for that team, and often a manager is over more than one team. So the challenges here start to be more noticeable, I think, in terms of successfully making this transition from lead to manager. One is that if you're doing a good job of being the manager, then you're going to have to give up some of the details of what's going on technically. And I know immediately, as soon as I say that, I've probably got half the people watching this disagreeing with me and saying, yeah, but what about Microsoft? What about Google? What about these managers that are still writing production code? And my answer to that is there's only 24 hours in a day, and you can't be the best you can be in everything. You have to make some choices. And this is a point where if you're going to be a good manager, then you have to actually spend time developing the people management side of the management role. And that time comes from somewhere, and it comes from the time you otherwise would have spent gaining knowledge about technical stuff and getting up to your eyeballs in the details of technical stuff. So yeah, there are organizations that have their managers still writing production code. I think those are high profile, but they are exceptions. And most organizations The organizations that try to copy that, often it doesn't work very well because they can't recruit the same level of talent that Google can recruit, or Amazon can recruit, or Microsoft can recruit. Um, Delegation's a big deal at this level, especially because a lot of us get into technical work and programming in the first place because we really like the details. We like rolling up our sleeves. We like completing tasks ourselves. And so when we get to this step, getting used to the idea that, it's really important to start accomplishing work through others. That's tough. That's a tough part of the transition. This is by no means unique to software. I think every management book you ever read, it's literally Management 101 that you should delegate. But I think this is a tough job. And when you add into it the lead fallacy concept, that the person, most organizations promote their better or best technical people into management. In fact, the move to management is perceived as a promotion. Uh, the feeling here that, oh, I could do this work better myself, there's some basis for that feeling. And so there's a decision point to be made here of, do I really want to stay on the management path? We really want to stay on the management path and go the people route, or do I want to kind of go back, revert back to a technical path where I can stay really detailed on the technical stuff? And so this is a level where I think a lot of people try it early in their careers. They're rising stars on the technical side. They don't like it. They bounce back down, or really in this example, back to the technical stuff. And then a pattern I've seen quite a few times is a few years go by, and eventually people realize, oh, you know what? I actually think the people side of this was kind of intriguing. I now realize, I do have an ability to give up some of the technical stuff a few years later in my career. And so people will take another run at the management path. Another challenge is developing business skills. And this is one where I'm not talking about knowledge of the business in one specific area. Lots of technical people at the individual contributor level have lots of knowledge in a detailed, specific, narrow area of the business. What I'm talking about here is business decision making, the ability to begin considering the needs of the business in the decisions that are made, not always letting pure technical considerations prevail, but actually thinking about the needs of the business. So knowledge of the business domain, which lots of technical people have super deep knowledge of the business domain, but I'm really talking about the skills here. Um, the next challenge is tough, is being interrupt driven. A lot of us on the technical side love being able to go heads down and work on something for 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours straight. We get a lot of satisfaction out of being in flow for a long time. Typical management job is interrupted a lot. And one of the things that you probably have to give up is any notion that you're going to be able to concentrate for something on hours at a time. Those moments become pretty rare. And so that's the tough part of the transition too. And a lot of people don't like it, and they just decide it's not for them. There's more emphasis on relationships, not as much as there is at the higher level, but this is a level where it becomes important to start investing in relationships outside of your discipline. So with salespeople, product management people, marketing people, financial people, general managers, and so there's a lot going on here, and that too is something that I think some technical people just don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on. We'll get to that. This becomes a bigger deal at the next level up, so we'll talk about it more there. Now, one of the things that's, I think, largely true is that at this level, you're communicating probably more, spending more time communicating here than you were as a leader, individual contributor, but the people are still pretty similar. They're mostly people in your discipline. And if I go back to um, this diagram, the manager for the most part is kind of looking down into the teams. They're managing the teams. Yeah, there's an awareness looking up, but mostly it's kind of a downward looking. And so because it's downward looking, most of that communication is actually with the people in the teams, the leads and individual contributors sometimes. So there's lots of communication, but maybe not a huge amount of diversity in who the communication is with. So when we get to the director level, we now have the director who's clearly responsible not just for the teams and the organization, but they're responsible for they're starting to drift maybe a little bit into the company. I would say not necessarily a lot, but a little bit. By director, I should be clear. What I mean is, at least in this talk, a director is a manager of managers. In a small organization, sometimes you'll have like one manager and then one director, or there won't even be a manager. There'll just be a director who's the de facto manager. So when I'm using the term director in this particular talk, I'm really referring to an organization that's large enough to have multiple managers and have a director above those multiple managers. So in this context, in a small company, that might be the whole company. In a larger company, it's an organization within the company and some awareness of of the larger company issues. So conceptually, the director sits here somewhere at the org level, and the director is going to maintain some awareness of what's going on inside the teams. The director is also going to be maintaining a stronger awareness of what's going on in the company, and probably a more significant awareness of what's going on in the market. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that the individual contributors and the managers don't have any awareness of what's going on in the market. What I'm saying is the emphasis shifts, the degree to which this is true shifts. And so as the person moves up, they become more aware of and more responsible for overall company results, overall responsibility for responding to the market. The director is probably not going to have a whole lot of awareness of what's going on at the individual contributor level. And I would say, so I think this is mostly off the table at the director level. A lot of directors will develop selective relationships with individuals that they view as influencers or people whose judgment they trust that they can turn to if they want to have a sounding board and kind of get a reading on where the team is technically. But that's really the extent of it. They're not directly managing individual contributors. They're managing their managers. The director is also going to largely be given up on detailed knowledge of the tasks and of the technology, and that's a huge part of the transition. A common pattern that I see at this level is that the director is not really able to spend a lot of time on technology during their day job. And so the pattern I see is that directors will do it on the weekends, kind of as a free time activity. If they really miss the technology, they end up coaching their kids' robotics team or taking on some kind of hobby programming project. But what they're not doing is, that's an end around to some other kind of technology. It's not production code in the majority of organizations. So challenges that I see here are increasing business focus, whereas this was beginning at the manager level, it's now really required at the director level. You just have to have it. And significantly, we get a change to business prioritization. And what that means is at the manager level, you're really looking out for your team, but you're not typically prioritizing the business over your team. At the director level, the director really has to be able to make decisions from time to time that prioritize the business over their team. And a typical example would be lots of larger organizations will have some kind of director level meeting that occurs maybe on a quarterly basis where they allocate resources across the organization. And the directors have to be willing to say, yeah, I'm willing to lose headcount in my organization because I realize it's more important to move those heads over to another project or another product line that is more important for the organization right now. So prioritizing the business over the team. There's more communication here, and by more communication, I literally mean more. I mean, more hours in the day are spent communicating with people. It's a more social role. And and the challenge here is that a lot of technical people get into technical work in the first place because we like being able to be task focused. We like being able to do a lot of work on our own. And we didn't get into programming in the first place so that we could spend all day talking to other people. And so really what this means is you need social capacity here. You need the capacity to be able to go into work and spend hours a day talking with other people. And some people from a technical background just don't have that capacity. And so we see people wash out at this level because they realize this is just sapping my energy. I go home tired every day. I have a hard time getting enthused about going to work in the morning. And when you get into a role that you go back into a role that's more hands-on and more direct contribution, task-oriented, technically oriented, then the energy level can come back up. But this is a key part of the transition, I think. And when I've seen directors who are really effective, they're not necessarily outgoing, but they have a high capacity for the social part of the job. And it doesn't necessarily even mean they prefer it. And that's why I'm not saying that they have to love it. I'm not saying they have to love it. I'm saying they have to have a capacity for it and a willingness to engage in it. So the other part of the communication challenge here is communication with dissimilar people. Now, yeah, at every level, from individual contributor to VP, there's some amount of communication with people outside your discipline. But at the director level, this is where it really starts to become a big deal, where a large part of your day is communicating with uh, people from other disciplines, like with legal, compliance, subject matter experts, maybe product management, and you're definitely spending some amount of your time looking down into the teams, but you're also spending a lot of your time, most of your time, actually looking more up out into the market, across the organization, coordinating the different initiatives that are going on across the organization, and so on. Another factor here is you don't get assignments the same way you do as a manager or a lead or an individual contributor. A lot of the job at the director level is figure out what needs to be done and then make it happen. And part of the job is figure out what needs to be done. And going back to where we all start as individual contributors, one of the things that's great as an individual contributor is there's not a lot of figure out what needs to be done. There's more like, here's the problem, figure out how to solve this problem. But there's not a lot of figure out what the problem even is. And so some people are just super uncomfortable with this ambiguity. And that's a place where I think people wash out too. If you're not comfortable taking an undefined assignment and bringing some definition to it, or you just don't have that ability, then that's going to be a challenge in that transition. And then another key part of the transition, the last part I'll mention today, is the shift to emphasis on relationships. And at the director level, we're starting to spend a lot more time interacting with people who are in different disciplines and where we don't have the background to make judgments about what they're telling us based on the facts. When in most organizations, if you're a manager, you used to do the kind of work that you're managing. And so when people start talking to you about the work they're doing, you can evaluate the credibility of what they're saying, or the how realistic what they're saying is based on your own background in that area. When you get into the director level work, now you're starting to look at work that's maybe not in the area that you had any background in. You don't have the background to evaluate it based on facts because you don't know what the facts were. You never worked in that area. So you spend a lot more time thinking about, do I find this person credible? Can I trust them? Are they reliable? And the interesting thing is, if you look at research on personality types, a la Myers-Briggs, most of humanity actually makes judgments that way based on relationships and reading people. Most of humanity does not make judgments based on facts, but technical people strongly prefer making judgments based on facts. So this is another kind of uncomfortable aspect of the transition where we're now making decisions not based on a list of criteria that we write down and then evaluating the criteria. We don't get that level of credibility. We're making decisions based on, do we trust this person and this person and this person? And if overall they're saying, yeah, 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 and we think they're credible, then because of that relationship and our judgment of the people, then we think that that's a good decision. That's a very, very significant shift in how people even go about thinking about decisions and making them. All right, the final transition that we'll talk about today is this transition from director to VP. And here, the VP, again, depending on the size of the organization, the VP is at least responsible for a whole organization. And if it's a company of any size and it's got multiple organizations, I'm just going to assume, for sake of this discussion, that the VP is that there's one VP in the company. Larger companies are going to have more than one VP, but for our purposes today, we'll just say this is the VP who's responsible for all of the software work in the company. And so at this point, then conceptually, the VP is up here somewhere. And the VP is most definitely looking out into the market. The VP is most definitely looking across the company. The VP is looking down into the organizations. Um, the VP is probably not looking down all the way into the team. I think the individual teams, they're not completely off limits by any means, but that's not the day-to-day focus of the VP. The VP is managing directors. The directors are managing managers. The managers are talking to the teams and the leads on the teams. The VP, the VP is kind of stopping at that level, I think. They'll have meetings with the teams where they're conveying information, but it becomes more formal. It's not like they're typically going in and rubbing shoulders with the teams, all the individuals on the teams all the time. Again, this can vary depending on the size of the organization. If we're talking about a smallish company or a smallish organization where I've got a VP that's over 50 people, then yeah, in that scenario, maybe the VP is reaching down into the teams. If I'm talking about a VP that's over 200 people, 500 people, then that VP is probably not going down into the teams very often. They're kind of stopping at the org level. So some interesting aspects of the transition here, I think anyway. One of the big ones is that in a company of any size, if the VP is moving up at the multiple director level, so the VP is over multiple directors, they typically are now overseeing areas where they don't have any background in the area, and yet they're responsible for managing that area. And so before, you might have been kind of losing touch technically as you move from manager to director. But now it's not that you're losing touch, it's that you were never in touch with that in the first place. And so that becomes an interesting management challenge moving up to that level. At the director level, losing touch with the technology entirely, here's where we again see the pattern of some organizations, including some high profile organizations, will have VPs who remain very current technically. Again, though, I think those are high profile for a reason, which is that they are the exception, not the rule. And they tend to be in companies that can hire the absolute tip top, most incredibly capable people on the planet. And so the ability of the most incredibly capable people on the planet is not what we see in the average organization. You might have people who are really good, but can't do a great job on the VP job and stay real tip top on the technical side as well. Again, it goes back to there only being 24 hours in the day. The VP job, if done well, is a big job in its own right. And the idea that you're going to stay top of your game technically and put in the investment required to do that and get up to speed and put in the investment to do a great job in all the ways the VP needs to do the job, it's just not realistic for the vast majority of people. So there's going to be a loss of touch, and some people don't want to make that transition, so they stay at the director level or they move to a smaller organization where they can have a VP title, but the VP responsibilities are light enough that they can stay more up to speed on the tech. So those patterns exist too. Here, I think we've been talking about the increasing business knowledge as we move through these transitions. One of the key changes here at the VP level is prioritizing the business first. And that means in some cases, the VP needs to be able to prioritize the needs of the business over the needs of individual contributors and over the needs of the team. And so that can mean moving people to assignments that they don't necessarily want, but that the company needs them to take on. It can mean making layoffs sometimes. And this is something a lot of people struggle with. If you have personal relationships with all the people who were with you on your way up through the organization, you really don't want to make decisions like laying people off. And maybe even if you didn't have those relationships coming up, you still don't like the idea of laying people off. But if you look at it from the business owner point of view, if the business owner needs to cut people in order to save the company, then they're going to want somebody in that VP role who's willing to make decisions that favor the company. It's just natural. And so at this level, a VP where your scope of responsibility is not individual contributors or teams or even the organization, your scope of responsibility is company, you have to be willing to prioritize the business first. I don't see too many people wash out for that reason, but there's definitely some people are going to be more comfortable with that than others. Here too, we have an increasing focus on relationships, and I think one of the interesting things about people who start out in technical roles is we don't tend to naturally make big investments in relationships with people above us. I think we tend to feel that that's unnatural or awkward. It's unnatural to reach out to the director above us or the VP above us and say, hey, do you want to have coffee? And I'd like to hear more about the whole organization. But that's really self-imposed. I think the people above are actually pretty receptive to that kind of an invitation. And so I think it's really a good idea to do that. By the time you get to the VP level, I think it becomes critical. You have to be investing in relationships with your product management organization, with your sales organization, marketing organization, finance organization, and C-levels in general. Those relationships become really important. And here I think you end up spending most of your time, or at least a lot more of your time, with non-technical people. And I would also characterize that as outside your discipline. So if you like that, then that's a great part of the role. If you would be more comfortable just hanging out with people and talking to people who are inside your discipline, then this is not going to feel like a natural place to be. So I guess to summarize a little bit, we can kind of talk about how the perspective changes over the course of your transition from individual contributor to team to organization to company, or from individual contributor to lead to manager to VP. And I think what we see is looks kind of like uh, looks kind of like this, which is sorry, just a moment here, which is, as an individual contributor, I would say the focus tends to be down. It's down toward the tasks, down toward my work, down toward the work of the team. At the lead level, I think it's still down. It's down into the team, and maybe a little bit sideways, coordinating with other teams and so on. And as we get to the manager level, it's still kind of down into the teams. It's still making sure that the tasks are getting done. There's still an awareness of what's going on at the pretty detailed level. There's definitely a lot more of this sideways orientation toward other disciplines and toward the work of multiple teams. And the orientation is starting to change up a little bit, up into the upper level management, including maybe non-software management, and up into the marketplace and the world at large. By the time you get to the director level, I think the orientation of perspective is mostly sideways, a lot up, and a little bit outside the organization and the company. So out into the big wide world. And by the time you get to VP, now you're talking about an orientation that's up into the C-suite, that's out into the full raft of disciplines needed to make a successful product. So product management, finance, everybody else. And it's a little down. And the reason I say that is little. There's still some downward orientation. At the director level, there's maybe more down. But at the VP level, we're kind of moving pieces around on the board more than kind of getting into the details and looking at people individually one by one. I think another way to just kind of summarize what we've been talking about is who gets protected at different levels as you move up. And I think at the individual contributor level, mostly kind of protecting self, and we tend to be protecting the tasks, project, release, the work. So I think that's what we're protecting. We want to make sure that the work is good quality, that we like the technical purity of the work. I don't think this changes a whole lot at the lead level, although we introduced the idea of protecting the team. The manager level, we're very definitely protecting the team. And so decisions are made for the sake of protecting the team. And you'll hear people say the manager's job is to protect the team. The manager's job is to remove impediments for the team. But at the director level, really what we're doing is protecting the organization. And so the job here is not so much to protect the team. If we need to actually de-optimize protection of one team for the sake of protecting the organization, then that's what needs to happen at that level. And at the VP level, then we're protecting the company. And usually these interests are aligned. Usually protecting the team, protecting the organization, protecting the company are lined up, but occasionally they're not in alignment. And so this says when they're not in alignment, the manager is still going to try to protect their team normally, but the director may have to make decisions that the manager doesn't agree with because the director is responsible for the macro level optimization of the organization, which may mean not optimizing one of the teams. And same basic idea at the VP level, responsible for optimizing the company, even if from time to time that's at the expense of an organization or team. So if you like any of what you've heard here, there's more of this in the Transitioning to Software Leadership Learning Program. In that program, our topics include working with diverse personal styles, which is important as a person makes that transition from individual contributor to lead and manager. We talk about emotional intelligence, which I can just see the eye rolls from 1,000 miles away as I say that. But that eye roll is the part that matters. If you're eye rolling at the topic of emotional intelligence, then that suggests there's a transition that needs to happen there that hasn't happened yet. Getting into all the ins and outs of communication that happen at the leadership level is another aspect of that program. Dealing with conflict, we haven't really talked about that much today, but being able to successfully work with conflict is another big thing. And then knowing how to lead for motivation and morale, also a big thing. In terms of where that program fits in the talk today, it really fits kind of here and here. It's basically for people transitioning into the lead role and people transitioning into the manager role. Really does not apply at these higher levels. If you're already director level or a manager, experienced manager moving into the director role, then course is probably not right for you. It really is about transitioning into software leadership. So our next program starts May 26th. That's a week from tomorrow, so a week from Thursday. The sessions are 3 hours on Thursdays for 6 weeks, and our registration deadline is this coming Monday. So if this sounds interesting, go to academy.construx.com and sign up. Love to have you in the program. I lead that program myself, and I think it's a super, super interesting and valuable program, and would love to see as many people there as are interested. All right, so I think at this point I will turn the microphone back over to Devin and see if we got any questions.
Oops. We do indeed, Steve. Thank you. As a reminder to everybody, we're using the Q&A app for the questions. So Steve, currently we have 6 questions. The first one's really simple, but I imagine the answer is not. It simply is, how do you move from one box to the next?
Yeah, well, I think by describing the challenges of moving really from one box to the next, I'm also describing the skills development that needs to occur in moving from one box to the next. And so, for example, if I go back to that first transition of, well, let's do the second one, not the individual contributor lead, but the lead to manager. Developing skill at delegation, you have to develop the skill. That's part of how you move. Developing a greater awareness of the business, not just subject matter expertise, but actually the business of the business. Developing relationships and learning how to communicate with people who are from different disciplines. These are all skills that are needed to make that transition. Some organizations will promote people when they're performing well in their current level. A lot of organizations, and certainly classical management wisdom, is that you promote people when they're already performing significantly at the level that they want to be promoted to, which actually just makes sense, right? Why would you promote someone who's not skilled enough yet to do the job that you're promoting them into? You at least like to have them hit the ground walking, if not running. And so I would say, start developing the skills that are needed at the level that you want to move to. And if you're at the individual contributor level, then start thinking about how would I delegate? What technical details am I willing to ever give those up, or do I really want to stay uh, extremely deep and knowledgeable about specific technical details for the foreseeable future? Learn more about the business, start cultivating relationships. I think it's fine to go have conversations with managers and directors, reach out to them, ask if they'll have coffee with you, talk about the job, and just say, hey, I'm wondering about how I want to develop in my career. I'm exploring whether management would be a more interesting path, or staying technical would be a more interesting path. Can you just describe your job to me? What do you do every day? And I think most people are actually pretty receptive to an invitation like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, you've just touched on this question, but I'm going to ask it because you might have more to add, right? Do you have any advice for introverts given this increased focus on relationships, right?
So I think that's a good question and a good self-awareness question. And going back to Myers-Briggs, a higher percentage of the software population does in fact test as introverts than extroverts. But I think we want to be careful what we mean when we say that. And the way that I like to characterize this is that extroverts are interested primarily in the outer world of people and relationships, and introverts are interested primarily in the inner world of ideas and theories, concepts, and so on. That does not mean that introverts are not interested in people and relationships. It just means that doesn't come the most naturally, or is not naturally primary. And the same thing is true for extroverts. It doesn't mean they're not interested in ideas and theories. It means that's not what comes to them first or most naturally. So I use the word very deliberately during the talk about having social capacity. And there are introverts who have extremely high social capacity and who actually thrive on that. It may not be their most natural tendency, uh, uh, but that can work fine. So I think some of it is just your self-awareness of, okay, I'm an introvert, fine. What's my social capacity? So like one thing I know about myself, for example, is I always test as an extrovert slightly, but I also know that my social capacity is not high enough for me personally to be successful as, say, a VP in a 500-person organization. There are aspects of that I would really like, but I know enough about the role to know that I would be socially exhausted if I spent 10 hours a day in meetings with other people. It just doesn't give me what I need to fill my batteries or recharge my batteries. So a role where I can spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours a day directly interacting with other people, that's going to be okay. But the demands at director level or VP level in a large organization probably beyond me personally. So that would be one answer. And the other answer I would say is this is not something that remains static over time for people. If somebody's in their, say, mid-20s and they think that they're an introvert and they have one level of social capacity, I'd say look at it again 5 years later, 10 years later. You might find that you feel differently, and you may have a different capacity. And that pattern I mentioned of people who try out management at one stage in their career, don't like it, bounce back down to technical work. 5 or 10 years later, they try it out again and they find, oh, actually, I really like this. And so, don't paint yourself into a corner. Don't draw yourself into a box that you can't get out of. Give yourself a chance to try it again later if it doesn't work the first time.
Great advice. Just one more reminder, everybody, to please type your questions into the Q&A app. Steve, Next question. How does one get clarity on whether people managers are also de facto technical leads or not?
I'm not 100% sure I understand that question. Can you read the question again?
Sure. How does one get clarity on whether people managers are also de facto technical leads or not?
Uh, uh, so I think that's something that tends to vary in organizations. In super technical organizations, especially where the technical people are subject matter experts in whatever the product is they're developing. So if you're developing computer tools, if you're developing a product like Microsoft Teams, where you are the audience for your product and you yourself can serve as a reasonable proxy for the product, I think it's pretty common. It's actually kind of a coincidence, but I think it's more common in those kinds of organizations for the people managers to stay technical longer. Uh, so, I mean, part of the answer is really just kind of look around and see what you see in your organization for others. Uh, and then part of it, I think, also is self-assess. Are you super excellent technically, and is that a transition you even want to make, to give up the some of that super excellence technically to move into more of a people focus, or are you pretty good technically but kind of miss the social interaction and crave more of that? Well, that might be a good indication that you could approach that role with more of that kind of focus. So I think part of my answer is in some organizations, it's really well defined, and then you're going to have to kind of conform to how the organization defines that. In other organizations, you can kind of define it so that it suits your strengths and just be clear with everybody what you're doing. And if you're okay moving into a first level manager role and saying, look, there are other people on this team who are more capable technically than I am, I'm going to defer to them. I'm not going to try to micromanage their technical decision making. Most of the teams I've ever seen will appreciate that.
Yep. Two people have asked this next question. What changes for someone on a technical track? Are there specific aspects for technical careers as opposed to the management track, people management track?
Right. So if somebody moves up on the technical side, I think so that yeah, I think this is a good question. Um, so if somebody's going to move up on the technical side, so they're probably still a lead here, and maybe they're an architect here, and maybe they're like chief architect, senior architect, something like that here. Uh, I think the main way I look at this is, whereas on the management side, you've got explicit people management responsibility here, you typically don't have people management responsibility along this more technical track. Um, but what you do have is you have increasing influence on the organization and on the people in the organization. And I think in technical organizations, what we often find is there's the explicit official people management hierarchy, and that's one organizational hierarchy. And then there's the unofficial, often unstated and undocumented expertise hierarchy. And that's what we're talking about here, is basically the expertise hierarchy. And in a lot of technical organizations, the expertise hierarchy trumps the people management hierarchy, because this is based on respect and buy-in from the staff at the grassroots level, whereas this is based more on organizational edict. And one of the concepts I think is super relevant here is moral authority to lead. And one of the mistakes technical organizations can make is promoting people into these roles who do not have the moral authority to lead. They haven't earned that authority. Whereas, and they can really, really make a big mistake if they promote people into these roles who haven't earned it, and haven't earned it in the eyes of the individual contributors, because they don't have the moral authority. And so then you're really messed up, because you've got this stated chief architect, etc., but you've really got some other hierarchy that goes up to some other people. So, so really, I think if somebody's more concerned with this path in a non-pathological version of it, uh, this is all about influence. It's all about leading through ideas, leading through the power of your of your decision making and your ideas. And the thing that's interesting about that is this is too. People don't realize it. People overvalue the organizational authority that people have here. But if these people are not also developing their ability to lead through influence in a software organization, this is going to be pretty problematic. So I think that's one thing that is maybe different in software organizations than in a lot of kinds of organizations is no matter which path you're on, influence matters, and that may not be intuitive for people, but uh, so what does that mean in terms of what I talked about? Communication matters a lot here. You don't have to maybe be quite as broad in the disciplines you can communicate with, but it still matters a lot. Conflict resolution still matters a lot. Developing relationships still matters a lot. And certainly at this level, most organizations are not going to put somebody in this spot who doesn't have a pretty good awareness of the business. And normally in organizations, by the time somebody gets to architect or chief architect level, they're going to be extremely knowledgeable about the business overall, and they're going to be incorporating business aspects into their technical decision making to a high degree. So I'd say actually maybe somewhat counterintuitively, there's a lot more overlap there than you might think.
Interesting. We have just 2 more questions, so we might go past the top of the hour. Next question, Steve. How would these transitions work for someone on the product management side?
Interesting question, and I have to plead ignorance on that. I will say that if somebody starts out on the product management side, my expectation is they probably have spent more time earlier in their lives thinking about communication, thinking about relationships, working in an interrupt-driven manner, and maybe concentrating more on the business. So I don't know. I mean, basically, I don't know. If I wanted to theorize, I might say, well, maybe on the product management side, they have to develop more understanding of the technical work as they move up, but I really don't know.
Great self-awareness, Steve. Last
Thank you,
question.
Devin.
Absolutely. How would you describe the state of career transition training within software companies right now?
How would I describe the state of career transition training within software companies right now? I would
Yeah.
say highly variable and mostly hit or miss, and way more miss than hit. I think our company has, for a very long time, had something we call our professional development ladder, which is a highly structured approach to helping someone move through these transitions. And I've been here describing the transitions in the large that could be years between steps, some cases many years between steps. Our professional development ladder is much more fine-grained and can help someone go step by step, not up to the VP level. It doesn't really go up that high, but at least up to the manager level and up to the architect level on the technical side. And I do think that companies really struggle with this. I think that in a lot of companies, there's not good definition around what the VP of software does. There's not good definition around what the directors do. And in a lot of cases, there's not even good definition around what the managers do. A lot of times people are just thrown into the role and it's sink or swim. And sometimes they end up just doing whatever they're good at and leave other stuff on the wayside. Sometimes they just got an idea from somewhere, nowhere in particular what they should be doing, and they do that. Sometimes they're still taking assignments at the manager level in particular. They're taking assignments from their director, and then the job just becomes whatever assignments the director gives, but not a lot of definition. Uh, I do think that as the years have gone by, we have seen a little bit more commonality in what directors are doing and what VPs are doing in software organizations. Uh, but I think that it's actually, if you were to search on the internet for what are the typical job responsibilities of software director, what are the typical job responsibilities of software VP, it's pretty scarce out there, and that's something that I've spent a lot of time looking at. I've had a book in mind for many years, which I have not gotten around to yet. Kind of kicking around the idea of delivering that as a lecture series, including this lecture. Uh, so if anybody's listening and thinks that's an interesting idea, get in touch with me and let me know. Maybe that'll tip me over the edge of doing that. But yeah, I think the industry probably could still benefit from a lot more definition around what the jobs even are. And once we have that, then we can talk about more specifics than I've given today about what it takes to make the transition into each of those jobs.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be doing another webinar with Steve in June, so watch for an email from Construx about that. Okay, take care, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody.